Apple floppy days,
Commodore,
Candy floppy days,
Atari,
TI floppy days. The weekend comes, the disk drive hums, ready to code for you. These days we're all happy and free.
those floppy days,
The games we play, you shared with me.
those days,
Motorola, Intel 6502, graphics and text are there to view. Composite, color, or RGB, program fun for you and me.
Floppy Days is recorded in a live studio.
Inside PC floppy days,
SD,
Amiga floppy days,
Junior,
Sinclair floppy days, classic days, microwaves, geeking all week with you. These days we're all happy and free.
those floppy days,
The games we play, you shared with me.
those days,
These floppy days are yours and mine. These floppy days are yours and mine. Floppy days.
The TRS-80 Model 3.
Introducing the Apple IIc.
Atari 1040 ST.
Commodore 64. What?
PC Junior, new from IBM.
Discover Atari.
At his Radio Shack Color Computer 3,
Introducing the Timex Sinclair 1000.
For computer, this is the one. Texas Instruments home computer.
a wonder computer of the 1980s, the Commodore VIC-20.
Hello and welcome to episode 129 for August 2023 of the Floppy Days Podcast with your host, Randy Kindig. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that we're in the middle of a series of episodes where we talk with Paul Terrell. Paul has been credited with essentially jump-starting the personal computer industry in many ways, not the least of which was by buying the original Apple I computer from the just getting started Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and selling it in his equally famous computer store chain, the Byte Shop. This was one of the first personal computer retail store chains in existence. Paul was also a member of the legendary Homebrew Computer Club and attended the West Coast Computer Faire. He was later involved in development of both the Exidy Sorcerer and BYT-8 computers, and he later went on to start ComputerMania, which was a chain of computer stores created with the purpose of renting computers and software. The first episode with Paul, June 2023's episode, was a sort of overview before Paul's time being involved with Exidy and the Exidy Sorcerer computer. Last month was segment 1 of 2, focusing directly on Exidy and the Sorcerer, and this month is segment 2 of 2, again focusing on Exidy and the Sorcerer. You'll hear more about how the Sorcerer came about, hear Paul's insight into why certain design decisions were made, and what mistakes were made. The Sorcerer was truly an early, important machine and had impressive features for the time frame that it came out. As a reminder, if you want to hear additional information about the Sorcerer and about Exidy, there are 2 other Floppy Days podcasts you'll want to listen to. Episode 17, where the Sorcerer is covered in detail, and episode 114, which features an interview with Howell Ivey. Howell was the principal designer of the Sorcerer and recollects his time at Exidy. Paul decided he would really like to be able to talk about his incredible career in its entirety, including an amazing number of industry-impacting contributions, more than just the time with Exidy. And I, of course, was ecstatic that he decided my humble podcast could be a good medium for that. What that means for the listener is you can expect an even broader series of continued podcasts with Paul in the near future, interspersed with other computer-based and interview episodes along the way. I really hope you enjoy the Paul Terrell series in general, and this episode should give you a nice wrap-up on his involvement with Exidy and the Sorcerer. Before we do that, I want to briefly mention the show sponsors. 8bitclassics.com, run by my friend Corey Colts, is a great place to get vintage computer items. Corey's been a friend of the show for some time, and I really appreciate his support of the podcast. Check out the site. He has some great stuff. ArcadeShopper.com, run by my friend Greg McGill, is another terrific site to get vintage computer items in which I've purchased from often. Thank you guys for your continued support. I also want to mention that you can donate through Patreon.com, the link in the show notes. Every dollar donated helps offset the cost of running the podcast. Numerous listeners already donate, and as a reward, I will be offering additional perks beyond the standard fare for everyone who donates. Stay tuned for more information on that. Okay, let's move on with the show.
Hi, this is Paul Terrell. Here's to the followers of Floppy Days, with a passion of the past events that ignited the personal computer revolution, from someone that was there at the time and a willing participant. I was involved in the first sales of Microsoft Basic to Data Terminals and Exidy Incorporated, which created the first software company in personal computing. And I bought the first 50 Apple I computers with a COD purchase order, which provided $25,000 of seed capital to start Apple Incorporated. The personal computer revolution is as significant as the Industrial Revolution was, and they say history repeats itself. A generation which ignores history has no past and no future. If you want to understand today, you have to search yesterday. So let's understand today with Floppy Days podcasts of yesteryear. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go into new acquisitions and what I've been up to. First of all, I want to give an update on the James Shackle Estate Hall. As discussed in the last couple of episodes, a friend of mine in the community, James Shackle, unfortunately passed away earlier this year. As he was a friend of the show and of me personally, he willed much of his vintage computer and gaming collection to me. In the previous episodes, I told the story about my wife and I taking a trip out to Arizona from Indianapolis in June to meet James's wife Jean, pick up the computer items, and bring them back to my home. It was quite a bit of stuff, and I've finally finished going through and cataloging all of it. I do have one story to tell about this since the last episode. James had a large number of Atari 5200 controllers to go along with the 3 Atari 5200 consoles that he had, and I took most of those with me. Unfortunately, I found that my Atari 5200, which I've had for years but haven't had on for quite some time, no longer worked. Closet rot, I guess. So I did a couple of things to remedy that situation. After all, I need at least one working 5200. Jean was kind enough to put together another couple of boxes to send to me, this time exclusively the 3 Atari 5200s that James had owned. It turned out that all 3 of them were the 4-port variety. For those familiar with the Atari 5200, there was an early 4-port variety with an unusual way of getting power through the switch box, and then a later 2-port variety that got power through the usual direct connect method. For the 4-port variety, you must have the special switch box or you can't power it. For your information, there's a mod for the machine that will convert it to a direct connect power connection, which you can get at console5.com, although it does require soldering to install. Anyway, all 3 of the 5200s that Gene sent worked, miraculously, although one of them had the top plastic controller cover shattered during shipping. This was a common problem with these machines. It's not unusual to see that controller cover gone on an Atari 5200. To top it all off, the 5200 even requires a different power supply than 400 and 800 computers use. Weird machine. My existing 5200 was a 2-port variety, and I really wanted to keep a working 2-port and a working 4-port. So I took my 2-port and James's 4-port with a broken controller cover to use as parts to the local Indie Vintage Computer Club meeting to see if the outstanding minds in that club could get my 2-port working. The good news is that through testing various chips, it was discovered that the Antic chip in the 2-port had gone bad, and that moving the Antic to the 2-port got it working. So now I have the working 2-port and 4-port varieties that I wanted, and I'm all set on that front. Thanks again to Gene Shackle for shipping the machines, and Chris and Lige at the Indie Vintage Computer Club for getting my 2-port working. I mentioned last show that some things were in a state of disassembly, including a very nice Tandy Model 4D that it appears he was in the process of adding an SD-based hard drive called Fred in place of one of the floppy drives. I did put the machine up on the bench to take stock of it. First of all, I discovered that I can't find the case screws anywhere in all the stuff I got, and Jean sent me all the screws she could find. So I've already contacted Jay Neuwirth at Newsoft to get some screws for the machine at Tandy Assembly coming up at the end of September. Secondly, I tested the Fred and unfortunately was not able to get the machine to boot with it or even recognize it. It appears James had done most of the work to install the Fred, including installing the boot ROM in the machine for it, but for some as yet unknown reason, it's not working. I need to go and do further evaluation and testing. I did contact Ian Maverick, a TRS-80 guru in Australia, about getting help with it and plan to bring it to Tandy Assembly to see if the great minds there can get it working. It's fantastic to have such a great community to draw upon. There definitely is some work to do here, but I'd like to continue James's legacy and finish the Tandy 4D for him. Last show, I also mentioned that the Commodore 128 and the Amiga 500 computers I got from James were also apart, although it appears just the case screws were removed. I also found that the Commodore 128 badge was missing. I don't recall it being missing when I sent the machine to James. I believe he did some retrobriting of the machine, as it's wider than it was before, and he must have removed the badge for that reason. I couldn't find the badge in any of the stuff, so I've already ordered and installed a new badge. The machine looks and works great now. For the Amiga 500, it appears James was in the process of installing a Gotek drive with a Gotek adapter for the Amiga drive slot in place of the floppy drive. All of that works great. The only problem I ran into is that, again, I couldn't find all the case screws in all the stuff I had, so I also ordered the specific screws needed for that machine, and now the machine is back together and working perfectly. That's it on the update for the James Shackle Estate Hall. In the meantime, I've continued to acquire lots of new items, and this month I wanted to mention a few of them. I've acquired several Atari 8-bit items, which I'll quickly go over now. First up is the Occam 810 with Atari interface. So the Occam 810 and 20 printers, one of those things I always kind of wanted back in the day, as it seemed to be pretty good for printing color graphics. I remember having an Epson RX80 printer that I used for my black and white printing, and it did a good job of printing, but I always kind of wanted a color printer of some sort, and the Occam 810 and 20 were pretty intriguing. It was a low-cost color printer, had different plug-and-print modules for different computers. There was one for the Commodore with the printer interface for the Commodore, an Atari with an SIO interface. You could get a module for the IBM PC, and you could also get a module that would allow connecting it to the Apple II computer. So, unlike thermal printers, which require thermal paper, the Occam 8 uses thermal transfer technology. The best results were obtained by printing to special thermal transfer paper, which looks like ordinary copier paper, but it's actually ultra smooth paper for the wax to adhere to. It was one of the first low-cost color printers available to consumers, and it really became popular for printing computer-drawn art with software like KoalaPad, which was available for several different platforms, for Neochrome, which was an Atari ST piece of software, Deluxe Paint, and others. But it was criticized for its slowness and high cost of operation. The wax-coated color ribbon only lasts for one pass, unlike an ink ribbon. So you go through ribbons pretty quickly. And, I mentioned the Occam 10, but there also was an Occam 20, a later printer. I don't really know what the advantages were or what the improvements were for the Occam 20 over the 10, but it was compatible, used the same interfaces as the Occam 10. In an earlier episode, I mentioned that I found a boxed Occam 10 with Commodore 64 interface in the Great Barn Find of 2022. There also were a couple of ribbons and paper that works well with the printer. I decided that I also wanted to get an interface for that Occam 10 that would allow it to work with the Atari 8-bit, as I typically do a lot with the Atari 8-bits. That is, it would have the SIO interface the Atari uses. As I perused options on eBay, I discovered that no one was selling just the interface, or if they do, it goes for dear money. However, purchasing an Occam 10, a full Occam 10, even boxed ones, was actually relatively inexpensive. I did some looking around and discovered a boxed Occam 10 at a great price that, by looking at the pictures that were posted there, I could see it already had the Atari 8-bit interface installed, even though it wasn't advertised as such. I don't think the seller even realized there was an Atari interface in the printer, or they just didn't care. I picked up that printer and now plan to get both the Commodore 64 and Atari interfaces working with my computer. It really should be a nice display at one of the shows. Something else I got on the Atari 8-bit front is a special peripheral I never thought I would own. My friend Paul Nermanen, aka Nermix, had acquired an ATR 8000 through contact with someone in the hobby. For those of you not familiar with the ATR 8000, which might be many of you, here's a bit about it. The 16K ATR 8000 Atari interface provides connections for standard disk drives, parallel printers, and standard serial communications. You can attach standard off-the-shelf disk drives to the ATR interface rather than having to buy one of the Atari disk drives or the drives that were made specifically for the Atari 8-bit computer. You can attach as many as 4 drives, including any combination of 8-inch, 5 1/4 inch standard drives, and 5 1/4 inch Atari drives to the ATR 8000. The printer port on the ATR lets you attach any Centronics compatible printer, in which case the 16K of RAM acts as a printer buffer. And then the RS-232 port on the ATR will allow you to attach a modem or a serial printer so that you don't have to have the Atari 850 interface. Now, even more exciting, with the 64K ATR 8000 or upgrading the 16K model, you actually can have a complete CP/M computer for which you use your Atari PC as a terminal. And even more, you can upgrade the ATR with an option called the CoPower 88, which will give you IBM PC compatibility for your Atari. It uses the same 8088 processor chip used by IBM and its clones and lets you use MS-DOS. As you can see, it's a pretty versatile peripheral. I always was interested in it, but it goes for enough money, especially a working one, that I really never thought I would own one. Paul contacted me and offered to send me the ATR 8000 for just the cost of shipping, as a donation to Floppy Days and Antique. I jumped on that offer and Paul mailed it to me. This particular ATR 8000 came with a dual 5¼ inch drive and all the discs and a special terminal cart for the Atari. I tested it, or it was tested, at one of the Indie Vintage Computer Club meetings and found that it does work. But the boot discs have gone bad and I'm going to have to acquire new ones. I'm really looking forward to getting this fully functioning. The next Atari item I acquired, this time from 8-Bit Classics, one of the sponsors of the show, is an upgrade for the Atari 1050 drive called the Happy 1050. The Happy 1050 adds true double density, high-speed backup, allows you to copy protected discs, and much more with the Atari 1050. The nice thing too is that it is easy solderless plug-in installation. Again, this is something I always wanted to play with, and even I can handle a solderless upgrade, I think. I probably jinxed it now. Now I have no excuse for not getting this installed and going into the fast lane with one of my 1050s. The final thing I acquired on the Atari front is something called the jack adapter, JAK adapter. The jack adapter allows connecting two Atari-style controllers to USB ports on your modern computer. So it supports standard joysticks, paddles, and also the Sega Mega Drive gamepads on either of the ports. And it has cheap and simple hardware, which is easy to build yourself. Now, I didn't build it myself. Chris Belcher at the Indie Vintage Computer Club built it, and I purchased it from him at a club meeting. I tested it with an Atari emulator, and it's great to be able to use an Atari controller for games through an emulator on my modern computer. And that's it for what I've been up to and new acquisitions for this month.
Okay, this is Howell Ivey, the designer of the Sorcerer computer and one of the owners of Exidy. And you are listening to the Floppy Days Podcast.
All right, now let's talk about upcoming computer shows. I'm real excited right now because I've got 2 computer shows I'm going to be attending in the next 30 days. And I'll talk about those as I go through this list here. But if you get a chance, try to get out to a computer show. It's really a lot of fun. It's a great way to meet others in the hobby. It's a great way to add to your collection. It's a great way to get rid of things that you may not want. So see what you can do. I hope to see you at the 2 events I'm going to be at. First, one of those that I'm going to be at is VCF Midwest, which is September 9th and 10th at the Waterford Banquets and Conference Center in Elmhurst, Illinois. The World of Retro Computing will be September 16th through the 17th, so that next weekend, in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. Tandy Assembly, the second show that I will be attending, it's September 29th through October 1st at the Courtyard by Marriott in Springfield, Ohio. So again, I'll have a table there, and I'm also going to go to the Tech Talks that they offer, so I hope to see you there. Amiga 38 Germany will be October 6th through the 7th at Das Rot Krokodil. I'm not going to try to pronounce the rest of this. The Interim Computer Festival, October 7th through the 8th in Seattle, Washington. Amy West, October 14th through the 15th in Sacramento, California. That's an Amiga show. A Dragon Meetup, October 7th through the 8th at the Center for Computing History in Cambridge, UK. Portland Retro Gaming Expo, another big show, one of those that I got to get to at some point, October 13th through the 15th at the Oregon Convention Center in Portland, Oregon. October 14th, so that same weekend as the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, is the Chicago TI International World Fair. And I think this has to have the best, most formal sounding name of all of the shows. Another one I need to get to, especially as close as it is for me, it's at the Evanston Public Library in Evanston, Illinois. And finally, for 2023, December 2nd through the 3rd will be the World of Commodore at the Admiral Inn, Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. And that's it for upcoming shows, remaining shows in 2023. All right, we are now ready for the interview with Paul Terrell. Paul starts out by talking about Jack Trammell and his interactions with Jack. So away we go.
The other thing that Jack did with his pet, and obviously the Commodore 20 and the 64, was when Jack went to Europe, he literally just took the $sign and changed it to a pound sign. So now a $495 computer was now 495 pounds if he was delivering it to Europe, which at the time was 2.5 times the dollar.
2.5 times? Wow.
2.5 times. That was incredible. So now what I'm going to show you is this is a photograph of the ad that we ran in Byte magazine for the introduction of the Sorcerer computer. And it says, introducing the computer that you've waited for. And this ad, it says in the body of the ad that the retail price of this is $895. Okay, now I'm going to show you that same ad that was done by our distributor in England. Okay, and here it is, and it's 950 pounds in the ad. Okay, so consequently, if we were delivering product internationally, you can see the profit.
Yeah,
that we're there. Okay,
I would think you'd be incentivized to send them all over to Europe.
Once again, they say that there was 20,000 Exidy Sorcerer computers that were sold worldwide, and we certainly didn't see 20,000 in the United States, but we did have a significant following here, and some of the things that were created along with the computer store for the computer manufacturers were these user groups. And so user groups were forming, and before the internet, the way people communicated and did a lot of things was through bulletin boards. And so you could hook your personal computer up serially to communications through the phone line, but where would they go? And so you could have them, go to a large scale computer as a smart terminal out there in a mainframe, so the user groups were people that they had owned the computer and they were trying to communicate with other owners in their group. And one of the bigger user groups, which actually my understanding was they were on 5 different continents. It was called the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and it came out in 1979. And the Sorcerer Apprentice, they were producing a monthly newsletter for. They were based in Michigan, and they were U.S. oriented. But when we started selling to CompuData in Europe, that was our distributor. And LivePort, you just saw the advertisement from LivePort in the UK, and that was for the Exidy Sorcerers that were going there. And then Dick Smith Electronics was another one down in Australia. He was the Radio Shack of Australia, and he started importing the Exidy Sorcerer computers down there. So these user groups were communicating, on all these 5 continents with other users and sharing software, sharing different things that they were able to do with their computers, and that was another thing that helped grow the marketplace and the reputation for the companies. Now, the other thing is, as far as Exidy goes, we are now able with CompuData to not only get letters of credit from them for the Sorcerer computers, but we could adjust the price according to their market that they had in the Netherlands, and they were involved with a government program over there with TV stations and providing computers to the public, and actually the taxation part of the government in Netherlands was giving away computers to businesses if they would do their tax software and pay the taxes that they owed the government through the CompuData computers. And so CompuData had a real requirement for production that basically Exidy was not able to keep up with, even though they had preferential price, even though they had preferential payment by letters of credit. So the solution there was to actually license the manufacturing of the computer to CompuData. And so that was the next stage. And of course, Exidy was even more favorable to that because now they didn't have to do anything other than collect a royalty check from CompuData for the number of machines that they had produced. And so I got very involved in those days. CompuData initially were 2 young kids, Franz Hetzenhauer and Robert Roumain, were 2 young kids like Bill Gates or Paul Allen at the time, Steve Jobs or Steve Wozniak. These are 18 to 20-year-old kids that, see the opportunity wherever they are with this personal computer industry. And so Franz and Robert came over and like I say, initially became a distributor through their company, CompuData. I actually introduced them to the president of Epson, and they became the distributor for the Epson printer in Europe. And so their distribution business was growing quite well. They got the contract with the government, and so then they had to build a manufacturing facility over there. And in the process, I was involved in the process of doing that and transferring our technology over there to the CompuData people. And then as their business grew in time, they ultimately, they needed to, as the computers got more sophisticated, you have to remember that the original design of the Exidy Sorcerer was based on cassette storage and teletypes. Okay, now, the marketplaces that we were all going into, it was more serious. It was floppy disk storage. It was hard disk storage, and so more sophistication needed to be added to the computers. And so when CompuData sat down to do a redesign of the Sorcerer computer that they were getting from us, at the same time they decided that they needed to change the name of their company. And so they did. They called their new company Tulip Computer. And so they brought out a Tulip computer for that marketplace. And as I told you recently, I was just able through eBay to buy a Tulip computer that I had. It was up in Nova Scotia. And so I had it imported to the U.S., and I actually have it here in my house.
Very cool.
And what was amazing to me in this computer when I got it, it was in the same similar case design, keyboard case design, but on the back end, the connections to that computer blew my mind away. They literally had, it wasn't an S100 bus connection coming out for an expansion unit. They literally had the connection to be able to connect directly to floppy disk drives. Also, they had connectors to plug directly into hard disk drives. They also had a connector back there to plug into a tape mass storage system, okay, and along with the serial and the parallel interfaces.
Well, sounds like a lot of ports on that machine. Wow.
That design was mind-boggling. I literally took the case apart and took a picture of the printed circuit board, and it was a very clean design, and the design was no bigger than the original Exidy Sorcerer's design that we had. The other thing that was significant about it was that obviously it had to operate on 220 volts, and so the design of their power supply was to put a switching power supply in there, which is much better power supply than we had in our original design of the Sorcerer. But the Tulip Computer Company literally got the start with the Exidy Sorcerer, advanced to a redesign of the Tulip One, which was their similar to the Sorcerer computer design, but obviously would plug into a case of floppy and hard drives, and then also they had there were other networking capabilities that were put into this, and the hard drive interface or the mass storage interface went to what was called a SCSI drive interface, which SCSI became a standard in the industry as well. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So they were advancing into, and once again did have a network connection to it, had a light pin port connection, right to that keyboard case. So it was a very impressive design that the next step for them, obviously, now we're getting into the 80s. And of course, who came along in the business in the 80s was IBM. And was Tulip still paying licensing fees even after they redesigned the Exidy and came out with the Tulip computer? Were they still paying any licensing fees to Exidy at that time? No, the licensing fees terminated. When they stopped using the Exidy machine. They stopped developing our machine. That the Tulip One was their design, and then I don't know whether they called it Tulip 2, but obviously the next design was a clone of the IBM PC. And the next time that I actually saw Franz and Robert, I went over to the Hanover Fair, which is the big event that they do in Europe, and they have all kinds of industries there. And in the computer section of the Hanover Fair, Tulip was the biggest personal computer company in all of Europe at the time, and they were producing the IBM compatible. And then eventually they ended up buying Commodore Europe and making that part of Tulip as well. But in the end, the company eventually went public, and then they had some issues in their public offering where at some point the company was terminated, and they ended up going out of business in the long term of it. I tried to contact Franz went off and bought a castle. Robert Romaine became a real estate broker in the town in Den Bosch where they had their computers, but they eventually got out of the computer industry and sold their public stock off, but very well retired in Europe.
So that tulip computer that you got, is that something that we can see? Is that something you have handy that we can actually take a look at?
Yeah, let me.
That would be really interesting to see. Obviously, I don't think anybody here in the U.S. has those. So, oh, nice. Okay. Wow. It kind of looks like a Commodore 128, sort of it looks like it's pretty big.
Yeah, and the Amiga and the ST, the 16-bit generations of computers, sort of went with that case style.
Yeah, now I can see the ports on the back there. I can see a floppy disk and parallel, serial, hard disk, something called SASE as the hard disk controller.
Yeah.
Huh. Very cool. Have you done much with it yet as far as...
I haven't. And actually, I went back to eBay, and it turns out that they've got another one up there for auction from the same supplier. So I don't know how many that guy's got. But,
yeah.
I figured if I didn't have the 220 to be able, the only 220 I have is to the dryer in my garage, and obviously it isn't. I'd have to make a connection to it and so forth. So it got a little more technical than I wanted to jump onto it at this time. But
so does that one take 220? Does the one you have take 220?
Yeah, it takes 220. And the other thing that's important to talk about here, when you go to Europe or you go to Australia, you go to these other countries, we had our own television standard here. And so the Exidy Sorcerer was NTSC, okay?
Right.
And in Europe, they had PAL and they had CCAM. PAL was in the UK, and it was a higher resolution television system. And then CCAM was in Europe, and once again, higher resolution. And that's why eventually, years ago, we converted over and took our NTSC standard and went with high definition TV. And I don't know whether you recall, but we had that transition time where you'd buy a box and you'd plug your computer into it. And then what was being broadcast was, it was no longer NTSC. So your TV without a converter box wouldn't work anymore. And then, as televisions became disposable consumer products, we just sort of disposed of the old TVs and we could buy a brand new one and of course today now they're all LCD and flat screen and 50 inches and all the rest of it, so, but back in the day, that was a consideration. And, another consideration in the design of this thing is also, the power supply and the connection to TVs. That's an area that nobody's really ever talked about before. And it's worth a discussion because in consumer electronics, the FCC is very concerned about noise being introduced into the environment, into your household. And, you and I would probably call it static electricity, or there's some static going on my TV screen. And where that comes from, actually, Apple was the first company to kind of take this on. Prior to Apple doing the Apple II, and the design of that was, they actually hired a guy by the name of Ron Holt. And when he came to work for the company, his task was to build a switching power supply. And when you do a switching power supply, just by the name of it, switching supply, you can just see kind of electricity switching and static being created. And it was a monster that had to be shielded and so forth. And so if you were selling products in the consumer marketplace, it was an issue. And that's why a lot of the early designs, and the Sorcerer itself was a linear power supply, not a switching power supply. But if you went into the business marketplace, you could get away from that. In the business market, they would allow for a higher degree of noise and so forth. But for us early manufacturers, what was going on was, and Apple ran into this, we were having to coat the inside of, in their case, it was injection molded case. They'd have to coat it with a metallic material to shield it. And so from the noise getting out and into your TV. The other thing was whether you were going to plug the TV directly into the computer itself. And in Apple's situation, what happens there is you have to go from the video signal to an RF signal. And so you have to create a radio frequency transmitter. And if you put that in your box, once again, you have to pass the shielding requirements of the FCC. So what Apple did very cleverly is they put a connector at the back of their unit with the video signal, and then a company by the name of Marty Spergel at M&R actually created an RF transmitter device that they would sell to all of the Apple dealers, and the Apple dealers would sell this $20 RF modulator that was outside the box that could then allow you to hook it right to a television set. And then they would have those switches that you saw in all of the video games, like the Atari, Coleco, Mattel video games. They have a switch where you could go from your TV to the game device.
To computer, yeah.
So those were some things that, once again, were important in the design elements of this. I'm sure Hal Ivey, when Paul Terrell went to him with the idea of, hey, let's do a graphics personal computer, he had no idea, the extent of all of the things we were going to run into, and obviously this idea of FCC requirements was not in the coin-op business, and that they were running into there with their arcade machines. So I'm sure that Hal became a much better designer over the years in doing that.
Yeah, it was certainly a very interesting machine. It came out so early, right after the big three, and the first one to have such great graphics and various other improvements over those machines. But a lot of people here in the U.S. were just not that aware of them, and that it even existed because they didn't sell that well here in the U.S. It costs you quite a bit to get one today if you want to buy one and have it in your collection, because they're just rare here.
Yeah, I think you're going to see more of that too. As time goes on. It's kind of interesting. As I started to research, I left in 1982 in January after we had sold the data systems division to Biotech Capital. They brought their management team in from New York, and usually that's the first thing that happens. The company that bought the company takes out the founders of the first company, and so they gave me my walking papers in January of '82, and that's when I left to go off. But in the process there, one of the things that was done by Biotech is they ended up not being successful with the Exidy data systems products. Their solution was to sell it off to a company called Dynasty in Dallas, Texas, and then Dynasty was actually a company that was taking it into the Amway and the Mary Kay marketplaces. They were actually, they had door-to-door salesmen that were taking these configurations of Exidy data systems, which were aimed more toward businesses. These door-to-door sales guys were going out there and selling 3 different systems that they called Smart Alec, and that was a marketplace they were going to. And the point I'm making here is that initial design of the Exidy Sorcerer was so solid that look at the different places the total different marketplace that embraced that particular design. If you're going to go to homes, what are you going to go to homes with? Not an Apple II, not a TRS-80, not a Commodore PET, but an Exidy Sorcerer, and we're going to call it Smart Alec. So it was interesting to me, and also Dick Smith Electronics. God help Dick Smith. He was down there in Australia, and he bought into the Exidy Sorcerer like you wouldn't believe. Okay, he really thought that this was computer magic, and he was going to take his whole chain of electronic stores and put them behind that. But we just never could satisfy the demand. So he ended up, actually, when you think about the proximity of Australia, not that far away from Hong Kong and China, and being able to source computer products out of there. And so he was able to transition from the Exidy Sorcerer into, I believe they called it the Video Brain down there. And Video Technology was building products for him out of China. And I got to know those people in later life when I was doing IBM clone stuff, but that's not part of the Exidy story here. But definitely, we had great contacts and all of these different areas, and I think in the end you got to look at it and say, everybody made some money off of this, and we certainly introduced personal computing to a lot of different people, and we were able to reach a lot of different people through things like our ROM packs, and the ability to get a computer to turn on and to have a character set that you understood from your IBM Selectric keyboard. We even had it's kind of funny. It was in Saudi Arabia, we had somebody come up with a computer that would take their character set in a ROM pack and actually have personal computing introduced, over there. So somewhere in Saudi Arabia, there's an Exidy Sorcerer with a ROM pack that speaks their language. Another one was the Japanese, and there's katakana and there's kanji, I think, are the two different versions of the Japanese. And I've seen these, we called them EEPROM packs, where you could buy a custom blank cartridge and you could make your own ROMs and put them in there. And of course, that's what these people with different foreign languages or different keyboard configurations would do, is they'd make their own custom EEPROMs. And to have that kind of a vision back in those days, to where you can look back on it and think that, you could really still today be using an Exidy Sorcerer as a word processor and have it be very functional. Yeah,
absolutely. So, Paul, do you stay in touch with any of the people you worked with at Exidy?
Hal Ivey is the only contact that I've made, and actually Hal has a son that I think was about Hal's age when I first met him. But I was down. I actually sold the first house that I ever bought in Silicon Valley back in 1966 when IBM hired me and moved me there. I sold that house in 2017, and I went down to Milpitas to sell the house, and I got a hold of Hal. He lives up in the hills in that same area, and the two of us had lunch together, and he actually invited his son to come down and have lunch with us.
Oh, nice.
So we had an opportunity to talk and stay in touch. And he was working for the high school where you had interviewed him there, and was involved with his space station stuff. And he keeps very active. And actually, I was thinking that, I might just get a hold of that guy on eBay and buy that other Tulip computer and give it to Hal.
There you go.
As much as I hate to go to Silicon Valley anymore because it's so crowded. It's a parking lot, and you just can't get around down there. And, that's what I found in 2017. I can imagine 2023, what it's like now. But, I'm kind of thinking the only thing that I really want to go back to Silicon Valley for is Apple's 50th anniversary, which is coming up here in a couple of years. And I really would like to go to the spaceship of Apple and see those guys. And I think one of the guys that's involved with the Apple One registry is trying to get Tim Cook to put something together for Wozniak and myself. And there's still a couple of guys from the Jobs Garage that are around, and maybe have a little reunion of all of us there. But
that'd be cool.
Yeah,
that'd be way cool. Woz is, he's a great guy, and he does a lot of interviews, but he's pretty busy guy, and not always easy to get time with. So I hope you get a chance to. So you showed us your tool computer. You don't actually have an Exidy Sorcerer, though, right?
I have one, but it's buried so deep right now. I don't know whether you can see these boxes behind me, but I've got. I'm in the process of packing stuff for my June 1 escape from Florida, and unfortunately, the Sorcerer I think got stuck in one of the bottom boxes. I opened the lids of some of them on top there and didn't see it, but I did, and I've got a couple of them actually in Vancouver this summer. I'm going to put together a little project. I've got the S100 bus and a couple of Sorcerers out there, and
cool.
And I'm going to dig into that and try and get something together and functional, and that's when I'll take this tulip out there with me and be able to deal with that then as well. But
you ought to come to one of the computer shows. There are quite a few throughout the year, even some in your area of the country, and bring those to the show. I know people would love to see them. I'd love to see some pictures of it once you get it all set up.
Yeah, what actually was refreshing for me and doing a little research for this podcast we're doing, I was trying to get the timeline of things together, and all the stuff that I was involved with. And I actually ran into some YouTube videos that were done for the Exidy Sorcerer. And one of the guys was down in Australia that did a really nice hardware presentation of it, explaining all of the things, and there were 2 or 3 links that I saved, because I'm in the process of putting together a book about this. There's a lot of things that I know that really haven't become public information. You mentioned keeping in touch with Woz, and Woz and I email back and forth all the time. And a month ago, there was somebody was selling a prototype board in an auction, and it was being sold for $400,000. And the San Jose Mercury News business editor got a hold of me and wanted to verify that it was the prototype that was showing me to give them a purchase order for 50 computers, and also that it was the prototype that Woz had taken to the Homebrew Computer Club, which is where I really first saw the computer running. And I had actually taken some Polaroids, of the computer at the time. And so what I did is I told him, I said, look, I'll send you email of these Polaroids that I took, of the computer then, and you can check and see, if that's the prototype board that you're selling in your auction. And they did, and they did confirm that I had Polaroids of the prototype and not the production units. And apparently the way they verified that is that Wozniak had bought a an Apple One computer off the production line. It was the first Apple to come off, and he gave it to Liza Loop, who was a teacher in the Bay Area, and she donated it to the Computer Museum in Mountain View. And so this auction company and the registry, Apple One registry people, were at the museum, and they confirmed that there's a different copyright on the production units than there were on the prototype units. Actually, Woz refers to them as trial boards. He said Jobs made 3 trial boards of the Apple One before they went into the solder mask production run of 200 boards, to deliver the first 50 to me and so forth. And so I have photographs that actually show the board that they auctioned off, and the board that I have pictures of actually running was a prototype or a trial board. Woz couldn't confirm whether it was, which one it was, because there were 3 of them made, but he did say that the copyright on the trial board says Apple, copyright Apple, and the production boards say copyright Apple Computer. So it was through the copyrights you could differentiate one from another. And by the way, that blank printed circuit board that was broken sold for $617,000. Okay,
wow. Wow. That's incredible.
So the auction houses called me and said, Paul, let's talk about your photographs. I think I know somebody who might want to buy those.
Yeah.
From you next to his broken printed circuit.
Yeah, that's right.
This is what when it was running. So anyway, that's another story to be told.
So that's the sort of stuff, those sort of stories are what you're planning to have in your book that you're working on?
Yeah, the book is initially the title was going to be Nothing Happens Until There's a Sale. And it was going to be focused. I've had a number of people over this time frame that I've talked to and discussed, my companies that I was doing and so forth. One of the people that I was close with at one point was Tom Peters, and Tom Peters was the inventor of the Peters Principle. And the Peters Principle basically states that you will succeed to your level of incompetence. And that's a perfect description for myself, because I'm a startup kind of guy. I like to take things that are an idea and turn them into something and start a company and get it started and get it to the point where we've got a product. And then at that point, I run into my level of incompetence. And that's where in a company's development, you need to bring in the next team that's going to take it, from 50 employees to 500 to 5,000 and so forth. And most people fall into that category, although there are a few exceptions out there that we saw with Steve Jobs, reaching his level of incompetence that the board thought and fired him, and that yet he came back and went on to further greatness. So at any rate, for the business school guys, I've actually had grandchildren of mine, come to me and say, they're teaching you in the business school here, this guy's written In Search of Excellence, and so good you can't forget them. And there's these paragraphs and stuff. And so I started to look into this, and I thought, there's a story, in these business schools about nothing happens until there's a sale. It was that purchase order for 50 Apple Ones that made Apple Computer. I mean, Woz was doing it as a hobby. It wasn't his job. And when I gave Jobs the purchase order, he went to Woz and said, "You've got to quit your job. We're going to start Apple Computer." And that's what they did. And so people need to think about that. Go out and try and sell your service or your product. before you're in production, don't run out there and grab the money and try and do all this without selling it and knowing about it. So I think there's some elements there, that I can address to that. Although, people have pointed out that a better title of it might be Wozniak at one point, when Jobs had passed away, had called me the fourth founder of Apple Computer. And people have said that, speculated that, if you titled it fourth founder of Apple Computer, you'd probably sell a lot more.
Yeah.
Nothing happens until there's a sale.
Yeah, that's true. That's probably true. All right. Well, Paul, I think that's a great history of the Exidy and the Exidy Sorcerer. I know we have a lot of other topics that we talked about, talking about at some point, like the Byte Shop and Apple Computer and all of that. So hopefully we'll have additional conversations, but I really appreciate all the additional information you're able to bring about Exidy and the Sorcerer. I think the listeners are going to really enjoy it.
Yeah, I really, appreciate what you're doing there with Floppy Days and your audience and, their interest in the old 8-bit stuff and the beginning of this. I really appreciate the fact that you're doing that. And actually, it was through the contact with Floppy Days and watching some of your podcasts that it regenerated an interest on my part to actually go back and look into, some of my past and see. And, once again, it was, Exidy having done the first or the second contract for Microsoft. I mean, we were instrumental in starting Microsoft just as the Byte Shop and the 50 purchase order was instrumental in starting Apple, and that I was there for that, and quite honestly, on that same vein, when I went back on that, I remembered, oh my God, Boyd Wilson at Repco, actually, we actually licensed from MITS Altair the Microsoft 8K Basic as sales reps for MITS. Boyd had a customer in Campbell, California by the name of Roy Worthington, and Roy Worthington had a company called Data Terminals, and what Roy was doing was he was taking a Diablo print mechanism and an 8080 microprocessor and making a smart and a keyboard and making a smart printing terminal out of that. And what Roy wanted to do was to have 8K Basic running on his terminal. And so he went to us as the sales reps, Repco, for MITS Altair and said, I don't want to buy an Altair computer. He said, I'm building a smart terminal computer here, but I want the Basic. And can you go to MITS and see if they would sell me a license to the Altair Basic? And so we did. And when we went to Ed Roberts at MITS and gave him a purchase order for the 8K Basic, it became an issue of what's the price. And so we licensed the very first license ever, and it was a sub-license. And I'm not sure, I'm actually still researching this, but we did the deal with MITS, and Roy gave him a check for $50,000 for the source code for 8K Basic. And Microsoft, 2 letters, Bill Gates' company, consulting to MITS Altair, who Paul Allen was an employee of. Okay, I'm not sure, but I think when Pertec bought MITS, there was a big legal issue about who owned the Basic, and Pertec was trying to make claim to it, and there was a lawsuit that was eventually settled between Pertec and Microsoft and over that issue. But I'm very interested to talk to Bill Gates. Actually, I have made contact with Roy Worthington to the point where Roy told me he wrote that check. I asked him if he had the purchase order. He didn't, but
yeah.
At any rate, here we are through your group and your Floppy Days and doing these podcasts that have gotten me going back to the point of the beginning of Microsoft. I mean, was that the first, that contract? I can imagine Ed Roberts walking in to the software room at the back where Paul and Bill hung out with their PDP-10 timeshare, developing the 8K BASIC, and Roberts walks in and says, "Hey guys, I want to sell your source code to your
right.
BASIC." Source code is the holy grail.
Right.
I mean, I can imagine what those two programmers said to Roberts. There's no way in hell, But once again, I don't know whether it was a sub-license of the MITS Altair license or whether Microsoft themselves actually got involved there and did the license agreement. I've got to get back. I've got a pending conversation with Roy. And then, as I said, I would love in my book to actually be able to spend some time with Gates and, go back to those days and talk about that stuff. And there's little detail in there, and they're fine points, but, it's like, how do you get from here to there? It was like, Apple took the leap of faith. They didn't take it till the purchase order came along. So does that mean that Paul Terrell provided the seed capital that started the biggest company in the world today? With a cash on delivery purchase order
it certainly seems that way. It certainly seems that way.
Well, Nolan Bushnell turned him down. Jack Tramiel turned him down.
Yeah.
They went to them just for cash, and they came to they came to me, and I didn't want cash or equity or anything. I just wanted to buy 50 of them and finance the purchase of it, So
right.
So I would call that seed capital. But
you've had an amazing career, and it's amazing what you've been in the middle of, during your career in terms of the history of personal computing. It's just incredible.
Yeah, we'll follow on with podcasts. I really enjoy your format and conversations, because there are some things out there that we haven't discussed. Software Emporiums was one of them. When I left Exidy, I went off and did software only stores, going back to the retail roots that I had, and I was involved with the rental of software and the rental of hardware, and Congress eventually shut me down when Orrin Hatch from the Justice Committee and the senator from Colorado, with the two biggest software companies at the time, WordPerfect and Novell, they created an vendetta against me and software rental, even though you could protect software. And I was telling them that's all we have to do, and we can rent it. And people don't have to pay $500 to find out that they bought something that they don't understand and they can't use. But if they could rent it and try it, you'll like it for $20 and know that, you can use it and you do know how and you want to buy it, then you came back and you bought the full product from me. I just rented it to you for a day or two to get through the trial and so forth. So, and once again, to have justice shut you down, that was kind of a termination, where the new owners weren't coming in and taking over where the founder visionary left. That was quite a shock. But there's other startups there that we could have fun talking about.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of topics and a lot of things I'd love to talk with you more about. Also, if you end up getting a hold of Woz and Bill Gates, would you put in a good plug for Floppy Days? Because those two guys are on my bucket list to talk to someday. So I would appreciate.
Sure, I will.
I would appreciate that. All right. Well, I think that we probably covered the topic pretty well today, Paul. We'll schedule other sessions to talk about some of these other topics. And I really appreciate your time today. It's been so fun to talk about your time at Exidy and all that. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the final sign-offs here that we might just take a look at was, Hal Ivey, you kept asking him in the podcast, do you regret, not going out and raising the money and taking that approach and everything? And, and Hal and Pete, they weren't seasoned in that area at all. And, as I described, my upbringing in that area and some of the experiences I'd had with venture capital and trying to sell the Byte Shops and then with Exidy and data systems, even the experienced, I felt that I was somewhat experienced. And when I picked the marriage partner for Exidy data systems, here I picked Biotech Capital, and not only are they a venture capital firm, but they're one that's at Wall Street. And my God, where are you going to go public? And who might be more in touch with all of that than Earl Bryan and Biotech Capital? And so I go and I do that marriage, and it turns out to be a total disaster. In the end, Biotech Capital just ended up, selling the division off to grab any cash that they could, and Exidy and Biotech Capital got in a lawsuit. Nobody ever profited from that. So in answer, I don't know how Hal could have done any better or had better success. Life's a crapshoot, and you're rolling the dice, and whether it was Hal or Pete rolling the dice to try and take Exidy to another step through the funding, who knows, what partner you're going to end up with there. But I certainly thought I had the one at the time, but I've never been successful in trying to find that right marriage partner in the end. Usually it's like Tom Peters says, you will succeed to your level of incompetence. Out the door you go. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul. We'll schedule something maybe later this month to talk some more.
Yeah. Just remember, I'm en route to Vancouver, Washington, and seeing the rest of this beautiful country that we've got out there.
Okay.
And in these changing times. So good talking to you. Good talking to you Floppy Day guys and you especially.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Have a good day. All right. Bye. Well, everyone, unfortunately, that is it for this particular episode for this month. I really enjoyed bringing you Paul Terrell's description of his time at Exidy and working on the Exidy Sorcerer, and I hope you're looking forward to additional conversations with Paul. I know I am. I provided links in the show notes for all the great websites we discussed during this podcast. Go to floppydays.com for the full list. Please provide feedback for the show. I really enjoy that at Apple Podcasts or on the website, via email at floppydays@gmail.com, Twitter at floppydays, Mastodon at floppydays@oldbytes.space, Blue Sky at floppydays.bsky.social, on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/floppydays, or on the Discord server, whose link you can find at floppydays.com. Besides the website and Apple Podcasts, Floppy Days is available for streaming at TuneIn, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify. Until the next show, pull out a vintage computer and compute just like it were yesterday. Bye!